Hey everybody, who dat to you? Welcome in, and big conversation that needs to be had today on this Monday. And I'll be honest, I'm gonna actually preface this by saying I don't think that this conversation is going to be had, but Saints fans definitely want to have it, so we're gonna do it. Now, Dennis Allen has already come out and said there's not going to be really any conversation when it comes to should we have a new starting quarterback? Should Jameis Winston replace Derek Carr? That said, I don't think that means the conversation shouldn't be had because, as we'll talk about in today's video, I think some of the questions about who's running the show and who's calling the shots, well, maybe they should be questioned if that makes any sense. Now, from yesterday's game, we've got the stats up behind us, and you can see what happened with everybody. And obviously, this is a very limited sample size when it comes to looking at Derek Carr and Jameis Winston. Stylistically, they are the same while yet different. When I mean they're the same, they both fit a West Coast system. When I say that they're different, you have Jameis Winston, who is more of a gunslinger style quarterback. That means he's going to take more shots, more chances, and he's going to make throws that most quarterback coaches would go, why would you ever do that? But when it works, you love it. Then you have Derek Carr, who's a little bit more of a game manager. Check down Charlie. I've compared him to Alex Smith in the past before, which you can have success with both. Now, neither, I think, are long-term options, right? Like, I don't think either is somebody, and the New Orleans Saints have made this very clear. They don't believe that either are long-term options. But if we're talking about what puts the team in the best position to have success, well, this is a topic that needs to get discussed. So let's just start with the numbers from yesterday. Jameis Winston finishes 13 for 25, 122 yards. That's a 9.4 average, 2 TDs, 2 interceptions, got 1 sack, and a 59.1 rating. Derek Carr, before going out with the injury, had 13 for 18, so same number of completions, better completion percentage. No touchdowns, though, no interceptions, and an 87.7 rating. But let's dive a little bit deeper into those numbers, okay? And chat, good to see you here. A little bit deeper. Derek Carr this year, and again, small sample size, Derek Carr is throwing about 66% completion percentage. Winston, about 55. And the big difference is going to be Winston is going to be, as you can see, more aggressive. Now, one key to go on the positive of the Jameis Winston side is he is going to probably throw more touchdowns. He is a more aggressive style guy, hence why his TD percentage is higher than Derek Carr's. And Derek Carr is actually putting around his career numbers. Derek Carr, historically, 65, 66% passer, has only thrown for 30 TDs once in his career, doesn't throw a lot of interceptions, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. At the very end, you'll see the quarterback ratings where you have the 89.8 for Derek Carr and the 56 for Jameis Winston. And it goes a little deeper, though. This is where you see a very, very different style between the two. This is where it kind of gets tricky. Derek Carr has made 17%, according to SIS, bad throws, as in throws he shouldn't have made, and he's also suffered from 12 drops. Shout out to the Saints dropping balls. Whereas Winston has only made 9.5. But the biggest difference between the two is on target. The biggest difference for Jameis Winston, especially this year, has been that Jameis Winston has just been wildly inaccurate. Now, I'm not saying this to simply just dash on Winston. Numbers are simply numbers. But 28.6% of his targets, most of them coming yesterday, were on target, as in he was typically off the mark on a lot of his throws, making it harder for his wide receivers. Now, at the same time, he did things that Derek Carr simply didn't. Winston scored. And to give you an example, I mentioned this earlier, where there are throws that Jameis Winston will make that a quarterback coach is going to scream and say, never make it. And then when it happens, you go, holy crap, that was amazing. A good example of that is the A.T. Perry touchdown. Now, Jameis Winston talked about that pretty in-depthly in a post-game press conference where on Tuesdays, him and a lot of the tight ends, the second-team wide receivers, the tight ends, all work on those style of plays. And I love that. But when this throw took place, it was part of what's called the scramble drill for the quarterback. Passes happen, you've broken out the pocket, you're buying time, and Jameis Winston's on the far left side of the field, throws it all the way across his body, all the way to the back right corner of the end zone, and A.T. Perry comes down with it for a touchdown. In terms of Good decision, horrible decision, great result. And that's a great example of the differences between the styles of Jameis Winston and Derek Carr, regardless of which one you want to have as your guy, right? I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to explain the differences. Personally, I don't think either one of them are the long-term option, and I don't think either of it matters because of one stat I'm about to show you right here. The New Orleans Saints are 1-11 under Dennis Allen when they play a team that is 500 or better. I don't think the problem is the quarterback, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think the problem is Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael, which I've said here a lot. I've actually said that quite often. So that's not like a new thing. And just to be clear, Dennis Allen has already come out and said, now we're going into the bye week, Dennis Allen says there are no plans to make any types of changes. But I think if you're the New Orleans Saints offense, which has only been consistent at being inconsistent, you've got to do something, at least have a conversation about what's going right and what's going wrong. Now, before we got into the show, I was reviewing some of the film and taking a look at some of the maybe, opportunities that players could have had or maybe that they missed. And there certainly were examples of those. There was an early miss by Derek Carr that could have resulted in a very nice long play that simply didn't. And it comes down to Derek Carr is his big problem, too passive in a lot of his attempts and his reads. I'll actually put that one back on. I'll put that one on the screen so y'all can see what I'm talking about. We're going to grab a piece of the game tape for you and throw it up on the screen. Hold on one second. I'll make it to where it's not taking up the entire screen. So what the play you're going to see is the New Orleans Saints are going against Minnesota's Tampa 2 coverage. For those that don't know what Tampa 2 coverage is, Tampa 2 coverage is two deep defenders with the middle linebacker dropping back into what's called the hole, and then you have four underneath coverages. The areas to attack Tampa 2 are the very deep middle, the intermediate sidelines, and underneath. Now, in this play above, it was a completed pass. I went to Taysom Hill down low. He was originally trying to get to the hitch route for Chris Olave, but the real read here and the real miss here is at the top of your screen. The safety is obviously playing inside leverage here in the Tampa 2, and the sideline shot is open. And these are the type of throws that Derek Carr has to make if he wants to be a playmaker. Those are the throws that Jameis Winston is willing to make, and I think that is a credit that Winston deserves to have. And at the same time, there are negatives to Winston's play. I remind everybody about the on-target percentage one. So on-target percentage, less than 29% of Winston's plays on target. So either way that you look at it, the New Orleans Saints need to have a conversation about what gets the balls in their playmakers' hands. Whether it's Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, who went out with injury, Juwan Johnson, and even now, as we saw, A.T. Perry. Because you look at the stats yesterday for the New Orleans Saints, and it's just very clear about one thing. The offense can't find any level of consistency or rhythm, no matter who's really at quarterback. Because in all fairness, in the second half, the Minnesota defense had kind of reverted to a very soft shell, and it was easier to pass against them. But I don't think that should be used as a negative to Winston, who did score 2 touchdowns. At the same time, he also threw 2 interceptions, and there was another interception that was dropped. So all of this is with a grain of salt. The biggest thing, though, is you're ending the day with guys like Alvin Kamara only having 9 rushing attempts. Taysom Hill not being seen really at all in this game. And as we've continually said over and over and over, when Taysom Hill is not used, who is arguably the best X factor on the New Orleans Saints team, they don't have consistent success. And that's a problem. And this comes back to what my belief the primary issue is: coaching. I always come back to coaching. This one right here. This is the stat that I can't leave. 1-11 when facing teams 500 or better. And to be clear, I think that yesterday's loss is more on the defense than the offense by a lot. Not that I'm trying to scapegoat for anybody, but this is supposed to be a defense-first team, and the defense gave up 5 scoring drives in the first 6 drives for the Minnesota Vikings. That's the biggest issue, but the New Orleans Saints offense still has got to find a way to have a level of consistency. Taysom Hill needs to be part of the game plan. Derek Carr, if he's going to be the quarterback going forward, cannot miss on opportunities that, and I know we got spoiled, but for example, if you're facing this type of coverage, an NFL quarterback needs to be able to make this read and know that I don't just have to check it down for 3 yards. I have a wide open window for a 15, 20-yard pass. It simply comes down to everybody has got to play better. And for a team to play better, I think it just needs better coaching. And this is when I look at the Minnesota Vikings team and I go, I see why they win. Like the New Orleans Saints defense, I truly love. But at the same time, for those that don't know, the New Orleans Saints are the second oldest team in the NFL by average age. And a lot of that is on the defensive side of the ball. I love Honey Badger, but he's clearly not the player that he was years ago. Addison and Hawkinson both had great routes and great runarounds on him in the Minnesota game. I love Cameron Jordan, but he's clearly not the 10-sack guy anymore. And even though Demario Davis is still playing at a, I would say, high level, he actually led the team yesterday in tackles and got the only sack the defense got yesterday. Those are your big names. And they're kind of hitting on the wrong side of the hill. And Harden in our Bleacher Report chat mentions that as well. Hate to say it, but our defense is too old. I think there's layers to the conversation. You've got 2 weeks now to figure things out because crazy enough, ladies and gentlemen, all of this said, we can talk about how bad Dennis Allen is. We can talk about how bad Winston, Carr, anybody, insert name of your frustration, and your frustrations are valid. The New Orleans Saints are still number 1 in the division. They're 5-5. Atlanta found a way to lose to the Arizona Cardinals, who had only had 1 win coming into that game. And Tampa is still below you. Now, Tampa has beaten you, so you still have the division in your hands, though. No matter what, the Saints, if it ended today, and I can't wait to see the chat's response to this, they'd be a playoff team. In fact, they would host a playoff game. And if the New Orleans Saints are going to have any chance of winning any of these games, they're going to have to find ways to find some consistency. And I think some of that starts with looking at quarterback. Now, again, I don't think that Jameis Winston is going to I really don't think he's going to start. And I'm not trying to say that as a Jameis Winston naysayer. I just think that's just not something Dennis Allen's going to do. But what I do think, and what I did see, is we know that Jameis Winston is willing to go out there and pull the trigger. If y'all follow my work on YouTube, Twitter, etc., one of my big things is pull the trigger. Heck, we have t-shirts about it. When there are shots, you take the shots. Don't be conservative, be aggressive. So even though Winston's not going to be starting, here's how we make up for that. With Taysom Hill, because Taysom Hill will go out and pull the trigger. Now, Taysom Hill does not have the arm talent that Jameis Winston does, nor does he have the arm talent that Derek Carr does, for that matter. But he has almost a reckless abandon, I would say. He's simply willing to do it. And if you remember a couple games ago, you had the New Orleans Saints calling shot plays where they did take a deep shot to Rashid Shaheed against the Colts, and it was slightly underthrown, but they still took the shot with Taysom. If the game against Minnesota teaches you anything, it's that you have to be aggressive as a quarterback. And I think there's a multi-level system here. Hard says, is this a quarterback problem or a Carmichael problem? I don't think there's a singular answer. Truthfully, I don't. If you ask me to put the majority of blame on somebody, I'm going to put the majority of blame on Pete Carmichael. I think that the New Orleans Saints offensive system is not a very good system. It is not operating very well. You can compare it to other West Coast teams around the league. For example, the Houston Texans, who are ascending, Shanahan, and the San Francisco 49ers. Those are teams that run West Coast offenses. Similar verbiage, similar concepts. They're running Hank. They're running Yankee. They're running Mesh. They're running 4 verts, which is not technically a West Coast concept, but everybody uses 4 verticals. All these teams are doing these and having more success. But at the same time, I don't want to act like everything is on Pete Carmichael because there's still issues with Derek Carr. There's issues with Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston threw 2 interceptions yesterday. Derek Carr missed wide open reads in a Tampa 2 coverage, which was a pre-snap to post-snap adjustment. But again, we're talking about guys who are NFL quarterbacks who need to be able to make these things happen. You know, if you're a Saints fan, what you want is wins. And wins are a multi-level concept because unlike, say, the NBA, nobody singularly comes in as a star and just dominates. And, whether you're a Winston fan, because I do realize that there are a lot of a lot of Saints fans calling for Winston to start because of his aggressive nature. They'd rather go down burning than go down slow. Or those who want more of the efficiency of Derek Carr, who is a far more efficient and safe quarterback, but he's not going to make as many big throws as Winston. That's just a nature of how they are different and how they play. But at the end of the day, someone's actually got to make the call in terms of coaching to improve the offensive performance. Now, TJ says someone has to stay in Jameis's ear because Jameis will throw in triple coverage. The thing is, he'll do that whether somebody's in his ear or not. And I do think that both of these quarterbacks, if Sean Payton were still here, and I hate to bring up Sean Payton because I realize that we're past the Sean Payton era, and I don't respect what he did to Saints fans and Saints Nation when he was here. The whole thing with Miami and how that went down, in my opinion, was basically deplorable, and there was no excuse for that. But what I do want to add real quick is that he is an elite play caller, and he would be getting much more out of either Derek Carr or Jameis Winston. It's no coincidence that when Jameis Winston did have Sean Payton before he went down with injury, was having basically the most efficient season of his entire career. He had thrown 14 TDs to only 3 interceptions and was throwing for basically 60%. Now, he wasn't throwing for the most yards that he ever had, but he was definitely more efficient and he was doing just enough to score. The only thing is Pete Carmichael clearly cannot draw that out of quarterbacks because you're not seeing Derek Carr be any different. You're not seeing Jameis Winston be any different. I mean, the Jameis Winston you saw yesterday was the gunslinger of go out, catch it, hopes and prayers. And neither of those things are going to win you football games. Consistency in the coaching, I think, has got to be the focal point if you're a Saints fan. And that's got to be the thing that I think over the next 2 weeks it's brought up the most. Jameis Winston versus Derek Carr as a starting argument is an argument that you can have. But I think even if you believe that Jameis is better, which is fine, if you believe he's better, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I still don't think that leads to the Saints winning more football games. Because I think at the end of the day, I'm going to bring you this stat over and over. At the end of the day, it comes down to this. Coaching. The New Orleans Saints, coached under Dennis Allen, lose against good teams. Simple as that. And even if we take away the record he had with the Raiders, because I personally don't like to hold against somebody what happened 10 years ago, he's still a guy who's winning about 43% of his games, 42% of his games in New Orleans. That's not good enough. And he's not operating at a high level. M. Richard in our Bleacher Report chat says, DA and PC need to go. I'd look into Loomis too, but what are we paying Carr for what we got? I'll be honest, and I know not everybody likes this, I love the contract for Derek Carr. Love it. I thought that's actually one of the best contract moves Loomis has made in a while. Now, for all those who are about to get really angry at me, let me explain why I think that, or why I say that. If you look at how Derek Carr's contract is laid out, it is, one, is the 13th highest paid quarterback by yearly average in the league. So he's not being paid top 5 or even top 10 money. Now, I know that when we see $150 million, our brains go, holy crap, that's a lot of money. In today's NFL terms, that's actually not a lot. That's not a lot of earnings. Now, that isn't to say that it's nothing. It's the 13th highest, and I'm not going to argue that he's playing 13th highest, but here's why I actually love what he did here. Because almost all of the dead cap and all of the cash is front-loaded in this contract. If you look at 2024, he's going to have a base salary of $30 million, which we've seen before. But if you look at the dead number, it's 52.8. Basically, this contract, even though it was a 4-year contract, is only 2 required years with a built-in 3rd year out. Basically, when Loomis made this contract, he said, we don't believe that you're the long-term option at quarterback, but you have the opportunity to prove it. It has a 3-year out, so in 2026, they can just completely cut it completely if they want to. But in 2025, his dead cap number goes from $52.8 million all the way down to 17. And I'm not saying that 17 million is a nothing number, but it's basically they gave Derek Carr a 2-year contract to work it out. In 3 years, if they couldn't find somebody else, they paid him to be a mid-tier bridge quarterback. So for Loomis's issue, I actually like what Loomis did here. Now, if Loomis would have paid Derek Carr $225 million over 6 years or something, and he would have guaranteed 80% of that, then I would have definitely been with you. But what they actually did with the contract is front-loaded a bridge quarterback contract and paid him the market value for what he's worth, but you're not stuck to him long term. Now, if Derek Carr suddenly starts playing great, well, good. You've got him 4 years and you've got him hook, line, and sinker. But if he plays bad, you're tied to him to at most for 2 with the ability to easily get out in the 3rd or even the 4th year if you so choose. So for Loomis, I give a little bit of credit there. If you want to go after Mickey Loomis, go after Mickey Loomis for the fact that the New Orleans Saints coaching staff is what it is. Go after Mickey Loomis for the fact that the New Orleans Saints coaching staff comes into this Minnesota game against Josh Dobbs in a Josh Dobbs, no offense, Josh Dobbs, who literally hasn't even played for a team for 2 weeks. And Josh Dobbs has run up and down the New Orleans Saints and made them look foolish. 8 carries for 44 yards with 23 completions for 268. 2 TDs. If you want to go after Mickey Loomis, go after him for the coaching decisions, which clearly are not panning out to anything more than a mediocrity and a mediocre team. That, I think, is a fair account. I'm going to go after Loomis for the contract for Derek Carr. But back to the point, I do want to kind of take a mini poll here with our Bleacher Report readers. Do you think that Jameis Winston should start, or do you think that Derek Carr should start? And I want you to put it in the comments section. Yeah, the comments section. And say for yourself. Personally, I think Derek Carr should stay because I don't think the problem is going to get fixed by being more aggressive at quarterback. I think the problem only gets fixed if you actually make a change at play caller. And I'm not even guaranteeing that makes a huge change, but I've been calling for Ronald Curry to replace Pete Carmichael as the primary play caller for weeks now. Simply because I do not believe at 25 games in, seeing him run the offense and his offense, I've not seen any level of consistency or success. The only teams this offense has any level of success against is bad teams. That's it. Huda says, have Jameis and Ronald Curry. TJ says, I think Carr should start, but we got to fire Pete Carmichael immediately. Hard says Carr just needs to make quick decisions, which I agree with. Jameis Winston will throw the ball out quicker. The only problem is he might throw that ball out quicker into triple coverage. And there are some quarterbacks who can get away with that. Drew Brees was one of them. Drew Brees was a gunslinger. By the way, I don't want to make it out like he wasn't. Drew Brees was a gunslinger. The only difference was Drew Brees was the most accurate quarterback of all time. So when he threw into triple coverage, it was probably in a spot where only his guy was going to get it. And the interception was because of a tip ball. Now, that doesn't mean that Drew was immune. It's simply that Drew was Drew. But Winston, you're going to run into the issue of what I showed you before, where his on-target percentage is shockingly low. And I'll put that number back on the screen just to remind you. And again, this isn't to hate on either one of these. This is just to give you, the fan, raw numbers. These are his completion numbers. On target percent, 28.6%. That means the ball was either barely catchable or just off target completely. Now, on the flip side of that, Derek Carr is absolutely not immune from critique because he's missing wide open reads that could result in big plays. And if there is something that the New Orleans Saints offense needs desperately, it's big plays. It does make you miss Drew Brees a lot, doesn't it? Man, when you have one special for 15 years, it's really tough to go to mediocre. And that's exactly what's happened. The New Orleans Saints have gone to mediocre. And we'll see. Little Richardson said, I'd start Carr, but I'm just not that big of a fan of 2+ interceptions a game. Texan cheats and says, none of the above. You Bleacher Report folks, quit cheating. You have to pick one. You could have said Taysom. I personally would rather start Winston or Carr over Taysom, but you had to say somebody. D. Taylor says, I think Jameis Winston only because he gets Olave involved and the ball in his playmaker's hands. My only counter to that is a lot of that in the second half came because Minnesota played a lot of zone defense that opened up a lot of Olave's short intermediate routes. But I do agree that he is willing to sling the ball directly to a singular person. I don't necessarily know if that's good or bad because Chris Olave has not exactly been consistent. But I do acknowledge that Jameis Winston was definitely willing to go to his first read and get the ball to Chris Olave. Whether that's good or bad is kind of up to y'all in the chat. Texas, I'm slightly biased, but we can get a 2-week trial of Taysom. I am done with the Taysom thing. I've watched enough Taysom film, studied enough Taysom. In fact, I actually had, we had this discussion on Twitter. I will read out the text because we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I'll go ahead and tell you what NFL regional scout that I used to work with This is what he said about Taysom Hill in terms of reads. So I don't think that he was awful at being a starter. It's just he's not good. I would say his tendency to check down and run, as opposed to being a good pocket passer and allowing plays to develop, which directly affected the Saints' ability to create big plays. He severely limited the offense despite having good playmakers on offense. That's in reference to Taysom Hill when he was starting for the Saints a couple of years ago. So, I mean, just from a scouting perspective and a coaching perspective, nobody really believes in Taysom as a full-term option. But at the same time, I have said for years now, Taysom Hill should have a minimum of 10 to 15 touches per game. And guess how many he had against the Vikings? Well, I'll let you see for yourself. 1 run, 2 catches. That's 3. Even I can do that math. That is simply not enough. That's not good enough, and that's not going to win football games. Talking about putting the ball in your playmaker's hands, Taysom Hill having the ball 3 times obviously is not the way to go. Is what it is. Interesting conversation to be had, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more over the next 2 days. I hope you enjoyed the content. Johnny says, going 5-5 with the second easiest schedule in the league and on the verge of losing the division and not making the playoffs for a third straight year. As a fan, this is too much to bear. From then, with Drew and Sean to now, we certainly were spoiled. Look, if you want to catch more of the content, check me out on Twitter at RevDeuceWyndham and check out our Saints Film Room. Today, we will be having a film study coming out you're going to want to watch on the YouTube channel. Look up Deuce Wyndham NFL or look up the Saints Film Room, Who Dat Confessional Podcast. Love and appreciate every single one of you. Who Dat, God bless. Y'all are all awesome. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.